3, 2, 1.
The Thursday, February 11, 2021 virtual meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission will now come to order. This virtual meeting is compliant with the Governor's Executive Order N-29-20, allowing for deviation of teleconference rules required by the Brown Act. Consistent with the order, this format provides a safe environment for staff, commissioners, and the public while allowing for open participation. This meeting is being broadcast on Comcast Channel 27 and the city's YouTube channel at youtube.com/BrisbaneCA. The agenda materials may be viewed online at brisbaneca.org. Any written comments submitted in advance of the meeting have already been provided to the Commission. For those who would like to make a comment, a call-in telephone number was provided on the agenda and will also be displayed during the meeting. Participants may also make their comments verbally through the Zoom webinar. Staff, please call the roll.
Commissioner Gomez?
Here.
Commissioner Gooding?
Here.
Commissioner Funkin?
Here.
Commissioner Patel?
Here.
Commissioner Sayasan?
Here. Next is adoption of the agenda. May I have a motion to adopt, please?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, can we take a voice vote?
Commissioner Gomez?
Aye.
Commissioner Gooding?
Aye.
Commissioner Funkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Patel?
Aye.
Commissioner Sayasan?
Aye. Next is the consent calendar. If there is any member of the public who would like to remove an item from the consent calendar, you may do so by texting, by calling and pressing *9 or hitting the raised hand button in Zoom. We'll wait 30 seconds for any comments. And while we wait, are there any commissioners who would like to remove an item? Okay, I see no one.
Seconds has passed.
Okay. May I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, let's take a voice vote.
Commissioner Gomez?
Aye.
Commissioner Gooding?
Aye.
Commissioner Funkin?
Aye.
Commissioner Patel?
Aye.
Commissioner Sayasan?
Aye. Motion passes. Next is oral communications. If there is any member of the public who wishes to address the commission about an item not on tonight's agenda, please do so within the next minute.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
it looks like we had a welcome and introduction that is inadvertently skipped over on our agenda. So
Oh,
maybe after
okay.
this, you want to go back to
Oh,
that?
yes. Sorry about that. Yes.
Okay, 1 minute has passed and no one has indicated anything.
Okay, thank you, Jeremiah. Yes, so we'd like to introduce our new commissioner and welcome him. Commissioner Funk, hello. We're glad to have you.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm very happy to be here and see everyone in person. I guess a few words about myself, maybe less than 30 seconds. I've been a resident for about 20 years or so, and have been involved in the community in a number of different ways, including Lion Club. We've always been closely involved with the schools. And now that we're empty nesters, I thought I had some spare capacity to participate in the community in some other way. And I know some of the good people on here, and I've known Napalo for a while and Doug, so I'm happy to be here.
Great, we're glad to have you. Okay, so no oral communications, we'll turn to written communications. I don't see anything. Staff, did anything come in?
No, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next is old business. We have none. We have no new business. So we'll turn to the next item, which is a study session. And that concerns SB2, Planning Grant Implementation Program, introducing objective residential design standards and project work program. Staff, may we have the presentation?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So tonight, our study session is going to focus on the Objective Design and Development Standards, or ODDS project. This is going to be a significant part of both the Planning Department and the Commission's work program this year. So this work is funded from a state grant under Senate Bill or SB2. That's a planning grant program to fund basically all California cities, should they take advantage of it, in order to bring their housing related regulations into conformance with some new state laws. So these state laws, which our consultants will summarize for you shortly, basically limit the ability for cities to deny residential development applications. So while the goal of the state is to ensure that new housing is not unduly constrained by local governments, the goal of this project for the city is to retain our control over the design of new residential and mixed use development applications that you would see through a design review or use permit process. So we did apply for a grant under the state program and received that grant approval last year. The ODDS project that we're talking about tonight is the most significant part of the grant, but staff will also be working on other technical activities funded through the grant this year that ultimately will be adopted by the City Council. So we listed those and I can review them briefly here. That includes a biological assessment and habitat conservation plan operating program for unplanned parcels in the SCR01 zoning district, which fall within the San Bruno Mountain Habitat Conservation Plan. The other items include updating our subdivision ordinance to comply with current requirements in state law and also make it a bit more user-friendly for both staff and developers. And adopting an affordable housing nexus fee that would be applied to new commercial development in order to generate some funds for affordable housing that the city can put to use. So with that, I'd like to introduce Aaron Ackman and Kavitha Kumar. They're with a Good City Company who we hired as consultants to guide us through the ODDS project, and they'll be leading tonight's study session. So Aaron, take it away.
Thank you, Julia, and good evening, Madam Chair and Planning Commission. My name is Aaron Ackman. I'm here with my colleague, Kavitha. Just a little bit of background on us. I've actually known your director for a number of years here. I've been a professional planner in the Bay or in the Peninsula for about 20 years now. So I'm pretty familiar with Brisbane as well as the other Peninsula cities. So Kavitha, if you could start the deck, we could jump right into it.
Yeah, I'm waiting. The host has disabled screen sharing right now. I need that to be enabled. Yeah.
Perfect. So here we are. Why don't we jump right into the next slide? So just an overview. Tonight we're going to go over really primarily what the state regulations are that are driving not only Brisbane, but virtually every city through California to undergo similar code updates. Really focus on what are subjective design standards versus objective design standards, as well as go into a lot of we really want to stress community outreach. Unfortunately, the way the state wrote these laws, it's not really a question of whether or not cities are going to do this, but really how cities are going to do this and how much local discretion is retained through the design process. Going over the overall program schedule, which will take about a year from now to be to completion, then of course take Planning Commission questions and feedback. Next slide, please. So when we look at housing regulations within the state, there's been a lot of headlines about different housing regulations that have been passed, really taking away control from cities over the last 5 years or so. While there are a number of them, many of these laws have been consolidated into two real overarching laws that affect cities. The first is Senate Bill 35, which we'll get into. So relatively new law, been around for a few years. And then the Housing Accountability Act, which has been around for about 40 years, but has been amended significantly over the last 2 or 3 years. Next slide. So SB 35, this is known as the Planning and Zoning Affordable Housing Streamlined Approval Process. And even though it says affordable housing here, it does have some effect on market rate housing that has inclusionary housing in it. This is something that ties to the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And I'm sure the Planning Commission is pretty familiar with the Regional Housing Needs Assessment process. But for people who may be watching at home who are not as familiar, every 8 years or so, the state allocates through ABAG, through the Association of Bay Area Governments, allocates a certain number of units that each city has to zone for. Cities don't have to build these units, but they need to create the zoning in order to have these units be built by developers and by affordable housing developers. Now, this law will basically go into effect when cities aren't meeting their regional housing needs assessment goals. At various income levels. So if a city is not making its moderate rate goals, the law is in effect for those type of units. If cities not making their lower income goals for housing, the SB 35 would kick in for those. And what SB 35 essentially does is turn discretionary design review and discretionary housing review projects and makes them a ministerial process. And what ministerial means is that as long as a developer meets the check boxes for all the different types of objective standards that are in the code, there's really not a public review process, and there really isn't a way for a city to deny a project that doesn't potentially meet the city's goals. Next slide, please. And you'll see the term objective standards used a lot, and we'll go more into what that actually means. So the second, as I mentioned, is the Housing Accountability Act. Been around for 39 years now, but it really has been strengthened over the last 2 or 3 years. If you look through the preamble of the law and look at the legislative intent, it basically says high level, we have this is going back 40 years and pretty much the same language, that we have a housing crisis within the state of California. A lot of that housing crisis has to do with lack of supply and increased demand. And the state shoulders a lot of the blame on local jurisdictions for not approving housing or creating confusing approval processes or uncertain approval processes that don't allow housing to be built. What the Housing Accountability Act says is that if your general plan in your zoning code allows for a certain density of homes to be built on a site, the city cannot subjectively take down the number of units because of findings that aren't objective. So let's say you have a zoning district that allows 50 units an acre and a 4-story building is proposed in that, and that's allowed under zoning code, and it goes through the process and it happens to be next door to a 2-story building and neighbors are objecting to it. What the state is saying, the cities can't arbitrarily say, no, that isn't compatible with the neighborhood. We're going to knock off a floor, which would reduce overall density. So that's really the key rule. Local governments cannot deny or reduce the density of housing developments that are consistent with locally adopted objective design standards and criteria. So next slide, please. So going into this whole process, there's 3 high-level questions we have to understand. A, what's the difference between subjective and objective standards? What are examples of objective design and development standards? And what does happen to a city if you don't adopt these type of standards? Next slide, please. So here are a couple examples of subjective standards that are found within the Brisbane Municipal Code right now. What I will say, as I mentioned, I've been doing this for a long time. These exact findings have been in virtually every city that I've worked in. These were kind of standard planning type of findings that were put into code 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So it's not unique that Brisbane has these subjective standards. But according to state law right now, these can't be applied in most circumstances when reviewing housing. So if you look at these subjective standards, a proposal's scale, form, and proportion are harmonious, and the materials and colors complement each other. So in order for the Brisbane Planning Commission, the Brisbane City Council to approve a multifamily development, they would have to make these findings. The features have to integrate well. They have to maintain a compatible relationship to adjacent developments. Now, the problem with these, according to the state, and according to, I mean, I've been in many situations where these type of findings really are difficult to navigate, is that reasonable people come to different conclusions. So what might be harmonious to one person, or what might be complement the project next door to one person, may be the exact opposite of what the person next to them thinks is harmonious or complementary. So that really puts a developer or affordable housing developer or market rate developer in a difficult position, because they may follow all the rules that are prescribed in the code, only to find themselves in a public hearing where a majority of the commissioners or a majority of the council members don't think something is harmonious, even though it's not spelled out or measured what harmonious means. Next slide, please. So what are objective standards? Now, objective standards are the opposite of that. They are quantifiable, they are measurable, there aren't disagreements for what it means. So examples, third stories must be set back at least 5 feet from the wall plane of the second story. That's really measurable. You could look at a building, you could look at a plan, and you know it's set back 5 feet. At least 50% of the planes of the exterior walls on public streets vary in depth or direction and use cornices, recesses, bay windows, or overhangs. That is something you could look on the plans, and everyone on the commission, everyone on the council and staff and the public could look at that and really measure that to make sure that 50% do meet those goals. And this is actually standards that the city of Brisbane have adopted back in 2017 as part of the city's Parkside Precise Plan. And honestly, not all cities already have these type of findings in place. So Brisbane is ahead of some other cities who have only subjective findings. Next slide, please. So what happens if you don't adopt this program? Well, I think Julia put it well in that the city simply would not have as much discretion as they would if you do adopt these. The way I would describe this overall is that instead of having your discretion on the back end, you're having now your discretion on the front end to really create the prescription for what you would like to see housing developments, multifamily housing developments that go through a design process look like. You're able to set the community expectations, able to set the city's expectation for design, but it has to be prescribed and it has to be exact. So what would happen in a real world standpoint if you don't adopt these is that a housing developer could propose something, make its way through the process, and the city, even though it might be a very unappealing building, the city would have no way to actually deny it because it might be consistent with the objective standards, which are minimal within the code right now, and the city could not make those harmonious type findings. Next slide, please. So the project goals overall for something like this, it's of course important because you are creating your discretion up front to really understand what the community's goals are, engage the community, and that's what we'll be doing over the next 6 months or so. And we've already started that. To maximize local discretion as allowed under state law, to understand what the constraints are. So another part of state law is that even though you have to adopt these objective design standards, they can't be unreasonable. You can't make them to the point that housing wouldn't actually be constructed. And that's going to be a big, even though this isn't part of this effort, that's going to be a big component of the next housing element cycle where the state is really going to be looking at a city's codes and saying, from a financial standpoint, is housing really going to be built? So we have to understand what the constraints are right now and then translate those into code. Then of course, the end result is we need to amend the zoning ordinance to incorporate the odds into new housing development review. Next slide. So one of the first things we kicked off is the community engagement effort to inform the community about the legal requirements, engage the community to determine the community preferences, and really engage where a lot of the new housing development is going to be focused is engage property owners within the SCR01 and the NCR02 zoning districts. And that's going to be, we've already started some of that over the last month or so. We've been having one-on-one interviews. And next slide. We've also launched a residents visual preference survey, and I think we've already got a number of responses to that. So I'd encourage everyone who's listening to this Planning Commission meeting to go on the city's website. And it's a really easy 5-10 minute survey that you could take. And if we go to the next slide, you know, we'll go over things like showing different photos of different types of buildings, asking what people like and don't like about different housing types, about specific architectural features, and allow them also, there's some areas where you could just, if it's not a prescribed choice, you're allowed to put in what you want to put in there. So next slide, please. So we look at 4 different housing types. The first is mixed use housing types. And all the photos that we show and all the photo simulations that we show within the design survey are either from Brisbane or cities within the peninsula. So local examples of things that are proposed or in some cases already built. Next slide, please. Here's a photo of or simulation of a townhome development. They're attached single family homes, but slightly denser than you would see normal detached single family homes. Next slide, please. Multi-family housing, attached apartments. Next slide, please. And detached single-family homes on Ridgeline. So as we mentioned, one of the areas where design review is applied and where those subjective standards are found right now is for Ridgeline development. Compared to other areas of the city, it's not the biggest area of the city. There's a total of 16 parcels that would be subject to this. There's 5 homes that were already built and went through this design review process. And so there's 11 more. So not a ton of homes out there, but of course for every neighbor and everyone going through this process, what the process is a big deal. So it's important that we get that right. Next slide, please. So in terms of timeline, as I mentioned, this is a timeline that takes us to about a year from now. We're in the second phase of that, which is public outreach. We've done some one-on-one interviews. We've done the engagement survey. This is our first public meeting. We'll have our next community meeting in early April, on April 6th, I believe. That's all posted on the website. And that will be a virtual meeting where we'll actually be able to engage people. It'll be an interactive meeting. We'll go over the survey results. And we've hired an expert as a subconsult to me who does these virtual meetings to really take people through. Even though it's honestly not as great as being in person for these meetings, I have found, I've been in a number of these community type meetings, you actually get a wider number of people that are able to come to these meetings. So that's a positive. And the way that these have been tailored over the last 3, 4, 5 months, that people have got used to the community engagement meetings, they really have got better. So I think it's going to be a positive experience for everyone who attends. We're hopeful, depending on the stay-at-home orders, that the last meeting, which may occur in August, that'll at least potentially be partially in person, but we're going to plan for it either way. We're going to at least have 2 virtual meetings and perhaps 3 virtual meetings. Next slide, please. So how you can say, and before I get into this, I would like to say, even though this is a state mandated process and something that all the cities are going to have to go through, I really do think it is also a positive opportunity for all cities that are involved in this to really engage the community in a design review process, much like you did with your precise plan, to set the city standards and set the expectations while allowing the city and the state to meet housing goals. So I think even though there's, it's never nice to have something that's put onto you from the state down to cities, there are positive aspects that we could take from it. And I think this will result in a really good code that could be used for decades in the future. So in terms of what's next, visual preference survey is there till March 1st. So I'd encourage everyone to take it. 3 community meetings. The first one is April 6th at 7 p.m. You'll be able to find the link on the city's website. As well as the registration process. We're thinking late spring and into summer for the 2nd and 3rd meeting. Of course, there'll be additional planning commission review and check-ins, as well as city council review and check-ins. Next slide, please. So questions and feedback. Of course, we could take any questions or feedback, but it would really be helpful to understand if there are any additional questions about state law, subjective standards, or objective standards, any comments or suggestions related to the project timeline or goal, and finally, any suggestions for the community meeting and public outreach. So that ends my presentation, and happy to take any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't have any questions. I'll go through with the commissioner, see if they have any questions. Commissioner Gooding, is there anything you would like to ask?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much for a very, very helpful presentation. As far as this planning commission is concerned, what will be the nature of when we have a chance for input or our decision point? What will our decision point be, and what will be the sort of the nature of our decision that's going to be asked for?
Well, ultimately, you'll be responsible for reviewing. This is probably going to take the form of zoning code text amendment.
Mhm.
And again, that's under the commission's purview to review that, have public hearing on that, and make recommendations to the city council. So you'll have a very much a formal role in the final adoption. Certainly, we'd encourage you to, obviously you can't participate as a group in the various public forums and venues, but certainly to kind of monitor those, see what you hear from the community. Again, your typical role of being a voice for what you hear in the community every day, and take that forward when you consider the formal recommendations.
So to make sure I understand, so after the several, I think 3 public forums, then the commission will have the duty to make recommendations to the council for zoning changes.
Yes, staff will have a formal recommendation to the commission for you to consider, modify, et cetera, and then, yes, recommendation to the council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gomez, do you have any questions?
No, Commissioner Saizon, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Patel?
No, I don't have any questions right now.
Commissioner Funk?
No, thank you. That was clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we don't have any questions. So does that conclude our presentation or on this issue?
Yep, that concludes. If there aren't any questions, if there are any comments or suggestions, we will take those as well. Of course, if this is a lot of information that you're taking in tonight, if something occurs to you later, I'm sure if you email those suggestions to staff, they could transmit them to us, and we'll make sure to take that in consideration during the outreach process.
We certainly will. You can email me. I'm the staff lead. And I'm also going to plug the survey. If you go to brisbaneca.org/SB2 survey, that'll take you right to it. So we do encourage anyone who hasn't yet taken it to take it.
And I think Commissioner Gooding had another comment.
Yeah, just one more question, please. Are there other cities on the peninsula that are sort of ahead of us in this process that we might, when the time comes, look to for not guidance, but some sort of precedent or consistency objective?
Yes, absolutely. There's a lot of people almost in the same area as we are now, some slightly ahead, some slightly behind. But yes, we will survey other cities to see what's working well, or how cities have been creative in doing this, and then use those as examples if it makes sense.
So during this process, you guys will come back and kind of give us the playing field.
Correct.
Great.
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Yeah, Commissioner Saizon.
Okay, Commissioner Gomez?
Yeah, so just actually a comment or clarification, so I guess it is a question, was around the time frame of community outreach. Does that have a clean start date and stop date? I apologize if I didn't catch that.
Sure. So the community outreach has been underway for about a month now. There's really 2 aspects of community outreach. There's the engagement survey, and then I've been having one-on-one interviews with some property owners that are around the 2 zoning designations that will be most impacted by this. We expect the community engagement process. Well, the survey will go through March 1st. The first community outreach meeting will be on April 6th. And we expect the community outreach process to conclude by August. Now, that's just the community outreach component of it. Of course, there's public hearings following that. So there will still be public involvement and public input beyond that. But the community outreach meetings will end in August.
Okay. All right. Thanks
Thank
for that
you.
clarification.
Aaron, just one question, or
Sure.
who it should be directed to. Are you expecting some sort of minimal critical mass of community input, like a certain percentage of the population? And if you don't, let's say you just have very little participation and feedback, is there some sort of template you fall back on?
So I guess I don't know if there's an exact amount, and I would have to rely somewhat on Brisbane staff, because it varies from city to city what percentage of people you would typically see in the process. I think, as everyone here knows, the more people you involved up front, the better it is, because when people see developments pop up, if they don't feel they were involved in the process that led to that, it's not a good thing. So we'll try to have as cast a wide a net as possible. But in the end, we're going to take as much community input, but you're also going to have some, standard urban planning practices that are put into there too, so that you do create code that's actually usable in the end. So it's going to be a balance of both.
And to jump onto the answer, I mean, our goal is to maximize the opportunity for public engagement and involvement, but certainly you can't really make people participate in something they're not inclined to participate in. So, I mean, our goal is to make sure the availability, the information is accessible, and we provide a lot of opportunity. To the extent we don't get direct, a lot of direct public feedback or through this process. Again, that's another layer of it, is what the commission does and what you provide, because you're representing the community as well. So, that's another layer of an opportunity for the community's interest to be advanced, even if there haven't been staggering numbers of participants in the actual formal outreach process.
Yeah,
I was
just
going
gonna
to say that. Oh, go ahead, Julia. Go ahead, Julia.
We are also, honestly, in a pandemic where all participation will be virtual, whereas virtual participation was more of a nice if you can do it for past efforts, right? For example, for Parkside, our first workshop was held in the street, and we shut down Old County Road for half a day. And I mean, there's just a part of this we're going to have to learn as we go, is to see how we can best engage people and broaden our ability to reach people virtually for the most part through this work program. And I think that'll definitely have a sort of impact on who's participating and how many people participate.
Right. I mean, and I will say throughout the peninsula, and it varies from city to city, but cities have been seeing higher participation rates over the last 6 months than they've seen in other community outreach processes, because people can just jump online for an hour or two rather than blocking out their whole evening, or if they have kids at home, it's a lot easier to get to these meetings. But what you have to make sure at the same time is that you deliver the same quality, or try to deliver the same quality as you did back when you were able to block off Old County Road and have that in-person meeting.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll go to the next item on the agenda, which is items initiated by staff. Staff, do we have anything?
Oh, just a couple quick things. One is the upcoming council meeting. I believe all the reappointed and new commissioners will be sworn in officially. So thank you again for your participation. We look forward to that in your service over the next 4 years. Much appreciated. So thanks for that. All the other boards and commissions will be sworn in as well at that time. And then the council did at their last meeting kind of go over their own sort of goal setting and work program type items. There wasn't anything, a lot of what they're doing that's planning commission related is carryover, things that you reviewed last year and they hadn't necessarily gotten to before the end of the calendar year. So they'll be looking at some of the follow up on some of the work you did last year in this next 6-month window. But there are, I think we talked about our work program. the last meeting and projects and activities like the SB2, for example, that Julia has initiated, things that you'll be seeing. So, the council is kind of aware of some of the bigger items that the commission will be wrestling with this year. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Next is items initiated by the commission. And the commissioners have anything?
Yeah. Mayor Sizon, am I coming
yes.
through?
Gomez?
Yeah, so this is directed to staff actually, and I must admit I should have raised just general concerns around this. It was with regard to, and I apologize, I don't have it right in front of me, so I can't cite the specific piece of code, but it was the issue around allowing for essentially larger garages on substandard lots. We debated that. The staff recommendation was to approve it. We approved it 5-0, and then it was reversed by council. I don't feel we debated that or had a discussion around that, or maybe I missed the meeting. I know I might have missed the meeting. And so I was just looking for a little clarity on when there are situations where when an issue is brought to us, we deliberate, debate, we vote, and then it gets reversed, whether it's a yay or a nay. I'm just wondering, do we want to institute some sort of additional review process around that?
Well, certainly, I think the one and Jeremiah, I believe that might be the case we've been talking about. I don't believe it was acted on. I believe it was continued because the council was looking for some more information that we've been trying to compile. That's one of those things they'll be following up with on, probably later this spring to the full council. But certainly the idea of staff and you being informed of whatever action the council takes. That's kind of the purpose of the staff sort of part of this meeting, is to advise you if a action's been taken, whether it's consistent with what the commission did or if they've taken a position, different from what the commission recommended, to provide that information to you. The idea of rehashing it in sort of great detail. I mean, the policy's been set, the law has been set by the council. We can certainly, discuss that to the commission's needs so you understand it. But in terms of formally revisiting that, there's really no point in formally revisiting it once the council's taken action.
So I guess I just find it peculiar when we have a situation like that. And I can't be in every single meeting. That's just the difficulty of my current commitments. And it's something I should have brought up sooner. I realize that. It's just the 6 weeks of 2021 have flown by, and the end of the year flew by. So it's been on my mind. If there's no appropriate way to have a more informed discussion around that, I just find any situation where if we're ruling if we're unanimous in our vote for the commission and something goes the other way, or vice versa, I just think it merits further discussion in a public forum with us involved. So just wanted to voice my my general thoughts around that.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Gomez. Wait, Commissioner Patel, you had something you want to add?
I just have a request of staff. If there is a situation where one of our decisions is being appealed, if you could let us know, I don't know, via email or whatever, and which date it's going to be heard on.
Is that John?
We do, yeah.
That's something you guys normally do, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We'll usually announce it verbally at your meeting,
Mhm.
assuming everyone is present, which typically you guys are. And just as a note too, for zoning ordinance amendments, you're making recommendations to council, so they will always be making the final decision. It wouldn't be an appeal necessarily.
Yeah, so So yeah, whatever we do, I mean, the council has the final say. So I understand your concerns, Commissioner Gomez, but I mean, it's kind of like, they are the final say. So we make our decision, and, I don't think there's anything, that comes after that. So, but whatever they decide, staff usually corrects. You guys will report to us what happens.
Yeah, and certainly if there's a policy flip-flop or a change that's very dramatic from what you recommended, certainly try to elaborate to the extent I can what seemed to drive the decision-making at the hearing at the council meeting. It doesn't happen a lot. I mean, and again, that particular zoning amendment text, again, it hasn't been resolved yet. I already know what some of the concerns were raised about it that we've been asked to research, but until the case is heard, I don't really want to get into the details. We'll present all that to the council and they'll make a decision. But occasionally on a planning approval, a planning permit, that's where you may have a more direct, where you do take an action, a final action, and it's appealed to the council. And again, if that happens and your decision is reversed, we'll make it clear why, to the extent that we can.
Thank you. Commissioner Gooding?
Yeah, I think, I don't want to speak for Napalo, and I'm not sure exactly what he's thinking, but I think I do. And my sense of this is that it's a good opportunity, or I think we should capitalize on opportunities to, in the event that the council has decided in a way different from our initial decision or our recommendation, to be able to sort of talk about that amongst ourselves to figure out whether or not we need to change the way we're looking at it, or how it impacts our decision process, and whether we should take any guidance from that, or figure out ways to be more consistent with what the city council decides is the correct course, the correct goals to achieve. So I think it is useful. I don't think we need to have lots of meetings about it, but I think to be able to revisit it real quickly to figure out if and when we were not on the same page as the council is probably valuable and important.
Okay, yeah, I agree. Anyone else? Okay, so we'll move on, and I guess that pretty much concludes our meeting. So may I have a motion to adjourn until our next meeting of February 25th, 2021?
So moved.
In a second?
Second.
Okay, let's take a voice vote.
Commissioner Gomez,
Aye.
Gooding,
Aye.
Funke,
Aye.
Patel,
Aye.
Sayasan.
Aye, motion passes. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.